Welcome to Literary Insights. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by that nagging inner voice telling you you're not good enough? Imagine learning to turn down that negative self-talk and finding your inner ally instead. In today's episode, we explore Diana M. Garcia's empowering book, Negative Thoughts Happen: How to Find Your Inner Ally When Your Inner Critic Shows Up. Discover practical, evidence-based techniques from acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, to help you make peace with your inner critic and listen to your true inner voice. Ready to transform your self-talk and live a more confident, kick-ass life? Let's dive in. This book aims to help readers change their relationship with their inner critic, the relentless negative self-talk and judgments that plague many people's minds. It promotes developing psychological flexibility to adapt to life's challenges despite internal and external difficulties. Psychological flexibility involves being present with thoughts and feelings while still acting according to one's values, even when experiencing painful internal states or facing external obstacles. The book will provide acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, tools to increase flexibility. ACT is a psychotherapy approach that emphasizes being present, aligning with values, and facing uncomfortable private experiences, thoughts, feelings, etc., without struggling against them. It offers interventions and strategies for doing so. Readers are encouraged to do the reflection exercises, journaling their responses. Going easy on oneself and with self-kindness is important while learning and practicing new approaches to thinking and behaving. The book is divided into two parts. The first explores the inner critic and negative self-talk. The second teaches how to cultivate an inner ally instead using ACT principles and skills. It aims to help readers live a meaningful and courageous life despite mental and situational challenges. Negative self-talk is a common phenomenon where an internal voice criticizes and judges oneself in a negative way. It often tries to point out flaws, mistakes, or things to worry about. Negative self-talk serves the purpose of trying to protect us from potential threats or mistakes, but it can become problematic when it is overly critical or the criticism is not valid or helpful. Nearly 50 million Americans experience some form of mental illness where negative self-talk is a factor, such as depression or anxiety. The COVID pandemic increased rates of mental health issues globally. If you like the book, you can purchase it using the links in the description below. By buying through these links, you contribute to the channel without paying any extra, as we receive a small commission. This helps us bring more quality content to you. The human brain is wired to focus more on potential threats or negative information as a survival mechanism. It applies the same problem-solving approach used in the external world to thoughts, feelings and experiences in one's internal world. The brain perceives any uncomfortable inner experiences like negative thoughts or feelings as problems to be solved. However, its proposed solutions like avoidance, distraction or perfectionism do not actually eliminate the problematic experiences in the long run. While negative self-talk aims to be helpful, it can become overly critical and harsh. Understanding how the brain functions can help provide perspective on why it acts this way and why the solutions don't always work. In summary, the passage discusses how negative self-talk is ubiquitous due to inherent properties of brain wiring and functioning, but can become unhelpful without proper perspective and management. Understanding the brain's approach can help address overly critical internal dialogues. From an evolutionary perspective, our ancestors had to constantly be on alert for threats to survive. This shaped how our minds evolved to have a negativity bias, focusing more on potential dangers. This is illustrated through a story about two prehistoric men, Jim and Fred. Jim is more anxious and assumes the worst, while Fred is more relaxed. Fred is usually right that things are safe but could be attacked occasionally. Jim's cautious genes were passed on. Neuroscience shows our brains are wired to more strongly recall, focus on and hold on to negative experiences rather than positive ones. This inner critic develops early on. Being part of a social group was essential for survival, so getting excluded could mean death. Our brains still link social rejection to potential death. Negative thoughts about being disliked fulfill this neural wiring. Language allows complex associations that animals can't make, but it can also backfire. Any object or memory can trigger unpleasant chains of thought due to past negative associations. This fuels negative self-talk. So in summary, both evolution and the way language forms associations in our brains make us prone to negativity bias and negative self-criticism as mental shortcuts that were once useful for survival, even if less so now. The inner critic develops early in life as children start to form a sense of self and self-narrative. This includes describing themselves physically and psychologically. Comparisons to others, idealized versions of self, and perceived views of how others see you can all contribute to negative thoughts being incorporated into one's self-story. Relationships with caregivers also influence the development of the inner critic. Criticism and lack of emotional responsiveness can shape a child's view of themselves. The inner critic serves a protective role by providing explanations and stories for painful experiences. This gives a sense of understanding even if the stories are distortions. Over time, the negative self-talk takes on a voice of its own and reinforces itself by finding evidence. This voice then aims to protect the person by urging pleasing behaviors, avoidance, or self-punishment. Gaining familiarity with one's inner critic rather than fighting it can help gain an upper hand over its negative influence. Self-compassion is also important for those with more severe self-loathing. The key message is that the inner critic develops early in life from various influences on one's self-narrative and aims both to explain past pain and protect the person, even if sometimes through unhealthy behaviors. Understanding its origins and voice can help manage its negative impact. The inner critic can influence one's relationship with achievements and accomplishments in several negative ways. It discourages pursuing new or meaningful goals that require change or growth, like further education or career changes, by highlighting past failures and doubts about one's abilities. This keeps one stuck. It triggers imposter syndrome in a sense that one is a fraud when trying new things, downplaying accomplishments and ensuring one doesn't feel capable. It encourages avoiding risks of failure by staying on the sidelines of life rather than pursuing dreams or what-ifs. Goals are chosen based on less risk instead of greater passion. It demands constant achievement and accomplishment to prove one's worth, pushing one to overwork without rest and joy, focusing only on outcomes and burning out. Successes are not fully enjoyed as the inner critic quickly resumes doubts, saying prior accomplishments don't count and the bar must constantly be raised. The inner critic sabotages fully investing in and enjoying meaningful goals by sowing self-doubt, discouragement of growth, constant need to achieve without rest, and inability to feel the impact of past wins. This impacts one's relationship with achievements and potential in life. The person feels it is selfish to find time for hobbies or spend time with friends while trying to balance being a mother and an attorney. They feel other parts of their life are off-limits according to specific rules that say it is selfish to take care of themselves. Finding a balance between responsibilities like work/parenting and self-care like hobbies/socialization can be challenging. However, it is important not to neglect one's own well-being. Completely avoiding activities for leisure or social support is unrealistic and unsustainable. Taking occasional breaks to recharge is not selfish, it allows one to be better able to meet familial and professional obligations over the long run. But it requires overcoming internal and external pressures that promote all or nothing, black and white thinking about what is or isn't selfish. A balanced, moderate approach that makes modest room for both responsibilities and personal fulfillment is ideal, though achieving it can be difficult when faced with guilt-inducing social expectations and rules. Professional help may aid in setting reasonable boundaries and priorities. Negative self-talk and painful inner experiences are normal and unavoidable for humans. Trying to eliminate them completely often leads to frustration and hopelessness. ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, focuses on living according to your values and committed actions, not on controlling thoughts/feelings. Part 2 of the book introduces ACT tools to help develop a kinder relationship with one's inner critic and find an inner ally. An important ACT skill is creating distance from unhelpful thoughts rather than believing or getting hooked by them. Thoughts are just thoughts, we don't have to completely listen to everything the mind says. Realizing we don't have to believe every thought can be a relief and a hack to gain influence over one's mind rather than feeling at its mercy. Consistently practicing creating distance from thoughts is key. The chapter introduces creating distance from thoughts as a tool, noting it involves changing one's relationship with negative thoughts rather than trying to eliminate them. Various ways can be explored to approach this skill. Our thoughts can form stories and explanations about who we are based on past experiences and events. While these stories may seem rational, they may not fully capture our complexity. Our mind tends to attach more meaning and weight to certain memories, like milestone events or difficult experiences, and use them to explain our behaviors and struggles. But this overlooks other possible factors and stories. An exercise suggests imagining our life events as a social media feed with posts of memorable moments. This helps identify which specific memories fuel negative self-talk and are over-focused on. Zooming out to view the full feed, including joyous and missing memories, provides perspective beyond any one difficult event. Our lives contain much more than a few key memories or explanations. The inner critic is skilled at directing attention to thoughts and memories that reinforce unhelpful beliefs. But we can counter this by zooming out, acknowledging complexity beyond any single event or story, and gaining distance from thoughts not serving us well. In summary, it discusses how our minds form stories of who we are based on past experiences, but this may overlook other possibilities. Exercises aim to gain perspective beyond any one memory or explanation, counter the inner critic, and free ourselves from thoughts no longer serving us. The passage discusses focusing too much on the past or future in an unhelpful way. Reviewing the past can be helpful for learning, but rumination is not. Worrying excessively about the future can also be unhelpful if it leads to spiraling anxiety. It then presents an exercise called dipping in and out of the river to practice separating from unhelpful thoughts. Participants imagine thoughts as a river they can dip into and out of. They first practice with pleasant thoughts, then switch to more difficult thoughts brought on by the inner critic. Each time, they are prompted to notice their stay immersed or step out by grounding themselves in the present moment. The passage reviews potential barriers like the mind objecting to the new strategy or having unrealistic expectations. It suggests thanking the mind for its objections and having grace for oneself when getting stuck. Overall, the goal is to flexibly create space from unhelpful thoughts rather than trying to control or get rid of them completely. Stepping back allows one to live according to their values rather than a thought's grip. The passage discusses using mindfulness and acceptance techniques to work with uncomfortable internal experiences like negative thoughts and difficult emotions. It argues that avoidance only perpetuates struggles by keeping these experiences hidden underwater, so to speak, where they continue to affect us unconsciously. Through exercises like physicalizing an experience and breaking it down into component parts, School of Fish, we can build willingness to openly experience what we've been avoiding. This allows the mental energy used for avoidance to be freed up for pursuing meaningful goals. While each individual uncomfortable thought or feeling may seem small on its own, the whole cluster of experiences collectively forms an intimidating shark that maintains patterns of avoidance. By mindfully observing and slowly making space for the various elements, the perceived threat decreases and we gain freedom. The goal is not to get rid of uncomfortable private experiences, but to change our relationship to them from one of conflict to curious observation. This supports taking courageous actions even in the face of fear and doubt. The chapter introduces the concept of mindfulness and being present in the current moment. Mindfulness means noticing your current experience, staying with it in a non-judgmental way, and redirecting attention to what matters. It discusses some common misconceptions around mindfulness, like thinking it will make difficult feelings disappear. The goal is not to make experiences go away, but to reduce resistance and direct attention elsewhere if needed. Mindfulness is noticing what is happening internally and externally without judgment, and choosing how to respond rather than getting swept away by thoughts and feelings. It references John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness as the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Being mindful is a core skill that can help with managing anxiety, the inner critic, and enjoying positive experiences without dread that they will end. It is a prerequisite for using many of the other strategies and exercises in managing difficult thoughts and feelings. Here are the key points from the summary. The passage encourages starting small with simple mindfulness exercises like focusing on breathing. It acknowledges some may struggle to focus on breathing and provides alternatives. It provides a guided breathing exercise. To try, focusing attention on the breath in different parts of the body. It stresses gently returning attention when the mind wanders. Informal mindfulness practices are suggested, like doing daily tasks with full awareness, for example washing dishes while observing all sensations. This strengthens ability to stay present. Suggestions are given for incorporating brief mindfulness into daily activities like showering, commuting, making coffee, etc. An exercise is provided using the 5 senses, sight, touch, hearing, smell, taste, as another way to center attention in the present moment when the mind is busy. It acknowledges the mind won't always stay quiet and provides alternatives like focusing on senses to help redirect attention from thoughts to present experience. So in summary, it discusses starting small with breath awareness, encourages informal daily mindfulness, and provides a 5 senses exercise as another way to come back to the present when thoughts are distracting. The chapter discusses treating yourself with compassion rather than harsh self-criticism. Many people believe harsh criticism from their inner critic is needed to keep them accountable and improve, but that is often not the case. Kind mentors who have positively influenced people tended to hold them accountable in a compassionate way without criticism. This disconnects with how some treat themselves. Self-compassion, rather than worshiping the inner critic, involves three components: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness according to researcher Kristen Neff. Self-kindness means treating yourself with warmth and caring rather than self-criticism. The chapter encourages being open to treating oneself like a loving friend or mentor rather than a harsh critic. This represents developing an inner ally rather than worshiping the inner critic. So in summary, the chapter challenges common beliefs that harsh self-criticism is needed for improvement and advocates for developing self-compassion through treating oneself with kindness, understanding one's shared humanity, and mindfulness. The passage discusses the importance of observing oneself rather than just knowing oneself. It notes that people often identify strongly with their various roles, traits, qualities, backgrounds, etc. when asked to describe themselves. However, this can trap a person in those identities and interfere with living meaningfully. It presents an analogy of the mind being like a house with many rooms containing different furniture, objects, memories. The physical structure of the house does not judge or care about what is in each room, it just contains it all without evaluation. Similarly, there is a part of oneself that can observe all the internal experiences like an uninvolved house framework. This observing self is stable and does not engage in thinking, judging, comparing, reminiscing like the thinking self does. The thinking self generates identities and labels for the observing self to get trapped in. The key is for the observing self to distance from the thinking self and its outputs in order to have freedom. The chapter discusses the concepts of the thinking self and the observing self. The thinking self corresponds to one's thoughts, feelings, judgments, etc., the content of one's inner experience. The observing self is the part that simply witnesses or observes this content without getting caught up in it. It remains separate and stable regardless of what the thinking self produces. This relates to the inner critic. When one can tap into the observing self more readily, they won't get as trapped by negative thoughts and self-evaluations generated by the inner critic. The observing self acts as a safe, stable space that all inner experiences, including those of the inner critic, merely arise within but do not affect. It provides flexibility and perspective. An exercise is described to help one connect with the observing self by bringing awareness to bodily sensations, roles, memories, etc. while noticing the part of oneself that simply witnesses all of this. The goal is to realize an intrinsic part of oneself that just is beyond the stories and identities of the thinking self. This can empower one to act according to their values rather than the inner critic's mandates. Another exercise is presented where one identifies a valued action blocked by the inner critic, states why they can't do it, but then raises their hand against that story to undermine the critic's power and take braver actions. The person says they are incapable of raising their right hand and could die if they keep it up for one more second. The responder encourages them to try raising their hand anyway, as a way to challenge unhelpful thoughts and show that we can do things despite what our mind says. This exercise demonstrates that we have a choice in how we respond, rather than being controlled by our thoughts. It can be applied to overcoming limitations we place on ourselves in other areas. Having an observing self that notices thoughts without identifying with them allows us to make intentional choices rather than being ruled by the thinking mind. Developing perspective-taking skills through exercises like imagining yourself at different ages can increase compassion and empower positive change. Values provide an inner compass to guide actions, even when the inner critic is loud. Clarity on one's principles makes it possible to engage meaningfully with life despite difficult experiences. So in summary, the key idea is that we can challenge limiting beliefs and choose empowering behaviors by differentiating thought from self, cultivating an observing perspective, and connecting to one's values and purpose. It's important to distinguish between values and goals. Values are broad and ongoing, while goals are specific and measurable. Assessing whether you live according to your values should not depend on attainment, as life can throw unexpected curveballs. Staying flexible involves making room for feelings when goals change, without excessive rumination from the inner critic. Only you get to choose your values. Don't feel pressure to adopt others' values or wait for the right time to act on yours. When unsure of values, try trying on some values and associated behaviors for a period to see what resonates. This builds clarity without expectations of permanence. The inner critic may confuse values, create doubt about living according to them, or tempt waiting for perfection instead of taking action now. Continually refocusing on identified values can help override these unhelpful influences. The chapter discusses committing to changing behaviors as a fundamental component of acceptance and commitment therapy. The goal is to have a life filled with actively doing things rather than just thinking about doing them. It provides an example of Matt, who felt stuck in his career. He was managing a restaurant even though he had a computer science degree and wanted something in that field. The behavior being analyzed is Matt deciding to stay at his current job. Some short-term benefits are paying bills and socializing with coworkers. Costs include feeling unfulfilled, not being challenged, and not maximizing financial potential. Examining Matt's inner critic helps identify why he gets stuck. His inner critic attacks his competence, reminds him of past failures, convinces him his current job is good enough, and predicts future failures. This causes Matt to feel anxiety, inadequacy, frustration, resentment, and sadness. The reader is then prompted to do the same exercise for their own area of feeling stuck. They identify behaviors, benefits, costs, and how the inner critic impacts behaviors and the thoughts and feelings that try to be avoided. The goal is to better understand drivers of behavior to commit to behavioral changes. The passage discusses the importance of setting goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, and time-bound in order to successfully work towards your values. Goals should be broken down into long, medium, and short-term in order to feel achievable and build momentum. They should also link directly to your identified core values. An exercise is provided to help the reader craft value-aligned goals by considering costs, values, long, medium, and short-term goals, as well as potential barriers and tools to overcome them. An example is given of a character named Matt who sets goals related to his value of being challenged. He hits obstacles in achieving his short-term goal but persists with support from his inner ally rather than giving up completely. The key message is that goal setting requires acknowledging obstacles, having problem-solving tools like thought exercises ready, and flexibility to adapt goals while still persisting towards values over time. Breaking big goals into smaller actions improves the chance of achieving them. Here is a summary of key points from the chapter on moving forward. When responding to negative self-talk or inner criticism, practice psychological flexibility rather than seeking to avoid, please, or bear it. Respond flexibly and choose actions aligned with your values. Loosening the grip of the inner critic allows reduced dirty pain from unhelpful coping mechanisms. With an inner ally guiding you, try new things with less fear of failure. In relationships, understand how your inner critic may have acted as a third wheel and impacted connection. Refer to previous reflections on relationship costs. Dig deep to identify core fears that may influence relationship tendencies, such as moving toward emotionally unavailable people, avoiding intimacy, or being somewhere in between. With an inner ally support, work to understand and shift relationship patterns by creating space from fears and engaging boldly yet flexibly. Commit to valuing your own and others' humanity over perfection. Set specific, doable goals in areas of self and relationships identified as priorities for growth. With patience and compassion, take small steps toward living more aligned with your values. When feelings of fear or insecurity arise in relationships, it's common for the inner critic to try and exacerbate those feelings through negative self-talk. This can lead to behaviors like seeking excessive reassurance or making negative assumptions about the other person's feelings/intentions. By exploring the role of the inner critic and disengaging from its hurtful thoughts, one can develop greater self-awareness and the ability to self-soothe in anxious moments rather than acting rashly. This improves relationship skills like communicating needs directly and trusting the other person. It's important to challenge the inner critic's influence over behaviors and decisions by anchoring one's actions in their values for the relationship rather than fear. This reduces tendencies to anxiously pursue or avoid relationships. Engaging fully in relationships requires the ability to receive feedback without reacting negatively and stay open to improving through understanding the other perspective. The inner critic will try to intervene, but connecting with the inner ally helps manage difficult emotions constructively. Similar skills apply to achieving goals and managing anxieties around performance, failure, burnout, etc. Focusing on process over outcome and detaching achievements from the inner critic's rules/expectations supports well-being and risk-taking aligned with one's values. Maintaining this perspective requires ongoing mindfulness, as old habits can re-emerge. Noticing and redirecting back to values is key when the inner critic reappears or one defaults to avoidance during difficulties. The inner critic keeps repeating that it believes the person is worthy of living a life that aligns with their values. It acknowledges past encouragement from mentors, clients, and family/friends. It is grateful for the support system and wishes to continue growing and helping others overcome challenges like anxiety and depression. The message conveys a caring, supportive tone that the person deserves to pursue fulfilling goals and live according to what really matters to them.